Hi, everybody. I'm Paul Mellender. I'm an artist, a concept artist, and illustrator, 3D artist in film, video games. And if you've heard this introduction, I apologize. It's the same old thing. Haven't changed professions yet. So I'm going to be doing some paint overs and some discussion and a little bit of portfolio review this time. So feel free to put any questions you have in the Rookies Drawing Discord channel, and I'll go there and respond as I can, and I'll read out the questions and interactions as they pop up. So to start with this week, or today, Owen has asked for a portfolio review. Let me give over a little bit of information on my style and ideas in terms of how to review a portfolio and where and why and so on. Um, so let me share screen real quick, and please forgive any clunky technical difficulties here. I'm juggling a couple of different things while I'm drawing and going over these, and I hope they aren't too distracting or too big an interruption. And if something should happen where audio cuts out or there's other difficulties, please let me know in the chat. Thanks. So let me grab the art station for Owen. There we go. And let's take a look here. So, um, uh, when I was going over this, one of the questions I asked, and I'll read over the interaction. Owen said, I'm trying to apply for a job as a concept artist with a focus on environment concept and a little bit of vehicle design. I want to know what aspects I could improve and add to my portfolio. I also want to know if it looks professional. And I also asked if Owen had a favorite piece that we can focus on. And sometimes when we do focus on a single piece, it'll inform other areas. And we'll go over the one that he preferred in just a moment. Um, for the first part, to cover the first parts of the question, focusing on environment concept art with vehicle design. I hate to begin to answer with a question, but I have a couple of questions for Owen on this, and we can, as Owen's able to reply, I'll read those. Um, I when I do concept art quite a bit, environments, vehicles included, and I often find that my work is informed by character design, and I'm able to take human traits and properties and attributes and characterize vehicles, landscapes, and other things with those, and they help enhance and bring interest as well as affinity to inanimate objects and vehicles. Um, I tend not to encourage people to be focused specialists, because as an artist we're polymaths, we're students of everything, and everything's going to inform everything else we do. We're rarely going to find ourselves in situations where we have to specialize to the point of factory work. That does come up in the industry, but it's usually what people are trying to work outside of doing the same repetitive tasks, doing the same specialized pipeline isn't actually a thing. Technology doesn't allow for it because every year things are getting, we're learning new pipelines, new technology. Things are getting easier at the same time as they're getting more difficult, and different types of knowledge and expertise are needed. So, as artists, we can't sit on our laurels and specialize. knowing as much and as wide as we possibly can is key to everything. So any of your environments will also be informed by any character work you do. Any of your vehicles will be informed by any other aspect of art that you touch, if that's animation, and especially something like animation, for example, where you have to figure out motions, gears, things shifting, and so on. So, in terms of focusing as a concept artist with vehicle design, um, let's take a look through, and I'll I'll make comments as I go. I'm not going to offer critique. If there is something that I see that maybe there's an area that I can improve, I'll grab that and do a little bit of paint over or give over some information. But first, let's just look at it and analyze for just a couple of minutes. Okay. So, right. Let's see what the before I answer, let's take a look at the overview and see where the theming's going and where and why. And likewise, Owen, if you do have any comments or anything, uh, feel free to jump into the chat, and the interaction is highly welcome. Okay, 3D blockout, color sketches, black and white sketches. Okay, as a quick pass, now there are things to consider, and like with this is I don't know of a brief that you would have received for this, but let's surmise a brief that there may be requests to we need to give over. For example, in this first scene, we need a sense of place, so hints of architecture, um, depending on where the point of focus is, like the focal depth. Different parts might want to be emphasized, like how bright the lights are, what type of coloring the scene has, like color grading, trying to let the color in the scene give over mood, emphasis on. So we have lights in the scene, and at night, if we have a warm, cool scenario there, or what the color might be for the scene, the color script that you're following for the next pieces as we're going through the narrative progression. These might want to be, if this is setting the scene and giving a sense of place, this first one might have hints of all of the above. For a thing like this, there might want to be some emphasis on glinting or reflective surfaces to help indicate edging, where we don't necessarily want high detail, but it can help delineate some of the shapes. And for the particular designs of the building, for example, and the curvatures, we might want some hints there. Also, there may be a chance to add a bit of a counterpoint of information between the warmness of the lights and the coolness of the environment, like possibly hinting at menace. So there might be a number of things that you would discuss with the art director, VFX supervisor, whoever you're doing the concepts for, that they'll be able to help inform some of these things. A bit of a warning for portfolios. what you'll run into trying to guess what anyone in particular might like or how to do a scene, or if you have your own scene in a, for instance, there it is helpful to sometimes take external sources or even from a book or whatnot that you give over some control and you try to interpret the information, not given your own sense of things. And I'm going to stop saying how irritating is that? The reason to do this is you want to be able to take and innovate ideas that aren't your own, reconfigure, reevaluate, and put things together so that they are matching a collaborative idea, not your own methods and your own habits. I run into this quite a bit myself, given my own, come up with a concept for my own stories. I definitely have a language that I use persistently, even though I don't recognize it, and it will affect a lot that I do. When I'm given a brief or when I'm trying to interpret even a passage from a book, I do have to start to double my thinking. I have to try to find keywords, develop metaphors and allegories that the author or whoever the director, art director, or otherwise may be putting forward, so that I can collaborate with that. I can share their vision and use my skills and powers to contribute to an overarching uh, piece. So when we're trying to do a thing on our own and put portfolio pieces together, um, one of the things to try to avoid, one of the things to try to avoid is going with our own best idea without tempering from an external source. Um, we we want to always try to avoid generalizing based on our own tastes and preferences and habits. So for this one, I'd also possibly do a little bit of work on the exposure and contrast. I get some darks in there, or vignetting, or other things that may hint at particular points of focus, even subtle ones, like if they're aiming back to the castle back here, where, what are we, or the castle, this main building back here, a little bit more light here, or some greater chroma, higher color value there. Okay. For this piece, just moving forward from this top piece, there may be an opportunity to use silhouetting, and also, again, having selective lights describe. And I think I have this one loaded up. Let me check real quick, and I'll do a quick paint over on it. Switch over screens again. Sorry for the uh, clunky technical aspects. Okay, for this piece, there we go. One of the things I might like to do is, and oftentimes with these paint overs, I'll be doing fairly simple tactics like relighting, um, because it isn't that there's necessarily tons that needs to be done to shift, but a few accents can do a lot. So emerging from the darkness is always a point of interest. And even having things where nighttime gives you a chance to add some extra drama and uncanny effects, like having, if there are shadows, having these silhouettes also be the shadows. They're emerging from uh, the darkness at their feet. Because there's contrast between these light sources, um, the things closer in we can darken a bit more. We'll probably want to. We'll probably want to indicate some, because these are the only lights here. We'll want to have some uh, a bit of power coming from them, just again by contrast with the darkness. Amplify the darkness and amplify the light. And this will also give us a chance to, because of the bouncing of the light on his clothes, we can set a contrast of light and dark. And adding toughness and strength to these guys will be delineating them. So that the points of intimidation basically stand out. And there's a principle I've mentioned actually a few times recently in some forums and discussions with artists, is don't be afraid to hide important pieces of information. Like it's tempting because we do want, we have two conflicting interests sometimes as artists, even with a portfolio, for example. You want to show you have the technical skill to be able to efficiently and proficiently draw a hand in a number of gestures. So you want to feature that. At the same time, you want to have everything in your image balanced against each other to contribute to an overall picture, which means that sometimes the good work and crafting you put on your hand is sacrificed and cast into shadow. There's a way to find some middle ground on that, which is, again, sometimes accenting and rim light and things along those lines. Um, Accenting is a very powerful tool because it's taking just a stroke or two, and that stroke implies all kinds of connections. It indicates completion and pattern with other things, a property called good completion. Good completion is this idea that if I were to draw these lines, let's say, in some type of pattern, this break right here, you imagine fills this gap here. You don't imagine that suddenly it just goes crazy and then links up to the next thing. You have a pretty good sense of order and pattern, and good completion is a way of using a few strokes to indicate a pattern your brain has already built prior to seeing, prior to getting to see the full aspect. So, in a number of these cases, some of the things we can do are add simple, sharp, linear accents, just a couple of things that indicate angle or mass or volume, and they can tell a huge amount. They can also tell, and again, if you do want to be able to show, hey, I proficient at anatomy. And that is a thing, for example, that concept artists are often asked for is, how are your skills with anatomy? You can show these full images and also show full studies that you've taken in particular an attribute or another, and include those in your portfolio as well. So again, I'm using line here to indicate also a little bit of motion here. Okay. Also, probably for this one, say that. Oops. Be nice if when I do these demonstrations, I actually show you something that's useful. I would have the area they're about to enter still be somewhat obscured and contrasted, allowing their darkness to play a part in delineating them, but also having the threshold have a mood and some obscurity because of the brightness here. I would further this part a little bit, almost adding glare. Giving a sense that they're also walking into an unknown, something that isn't clear and is somewhat obscured. But as we rise up away from the threshold, maybe even a couple of lost edges in here, clarity as we're going up. And even in parts, I would take the light and amplify it. And a couple of these areas, I would sharpen the edges on them, even artificially. As we go up. Let's extend that out a little bit. Okay, so the reasoning for this is to give a little bit more intensity to emergence. So they're emerging from the darkness. As I mentioned earlier, with the if there's a color script or if there's some type of known grading or a palette that's meant to have its own method of storytelling, you'll want to pepper your scenes with that as well. So I don't want to get too off track on this because this is a bit away from, this is a reasonable analysis to look at some things, but it's a bit away from the question of the vehicles and the environments and general overview. So let me jump back to the ArtStation page. Right. Okay. Again, with this, a couple of these pieces, I'd add darkness, like if you want these ninjas, for example, running past, them running past as blurred shadows will have a big impact, thinking of it in terms of animation. I won't linger too long on these pieces. I want to actually jump over to some of the uh, mechanical and environment stuff. Okay. All right. Um, for this one, I don't have a ton to say. Um, Largely because I don't know the context of it. Let me see if there's. Yeah, I'm not sure. So sometimes, like looking at a piece like this and trying to discern uh, what might be reasonable information to, like, say this is good for a portfolio or isn't good for a portfolio. Um, Context can be given, and it's sometimes also a reasonable thing to put in a portfolio. You can put in your best prized work and the things that you did involved with it and give over a brief description of some of the production stresses that brought it to pass. You can also take works that you don't feel are as strong and do the same thing because they too are a type of accomplishment. And you can say, hey, this production, here were these errors, flaws, and so on. I'd like to describe how we arrived at this solution. With those, it is helpful if you're going to add a piece that you don't love to a portfolio to that's gone into a professional production and is available to show. You might want to also take your own version of what you wish it could have been, given a your own input and force to bring it to the quality you thought it should be. So, in other words, sometimes you want to take your strongest piece and describe it, and sometimes you can take a piece that isn't so strong, rework it, and also describe it. The main commonality there is description. Lead people to understand what it is that they're looking at. Um, there are a couple of things I've run into, and I often warn people about portfolios because it's very difficult to know where these are going and how they're going to be received. So there are art directors and hiring managers and recruiters and HR people who are very conscientious. Will go through these things, will match the criteria of the job that they're advertising for, and they will take these things very seriously. That said, there's also the opposite. Your work may land in front of an art director who's actually personally adversarial to your type of work for whatever reason. Um, I've seen situations where hiring managers, art directors, or art leads, given the chance to look through portfolios, will try to tear them down, lampoon them, gather other artists around to make fun of them. Oftentimes, the work in those portfolios, they themselves don't have the skills to do, but they do socially bond inside the studio around them. It's helpful to give guidance in your portfolio as far as possible to what it is you'd like people to focus on and see. So sometimes written things can be helpful. You may hear that don't overload your portfolio. There's not a lot of things. People are very busy. They don't have time to go through your portfolio. I tend to disagree with that. I do think it is a hiring manager's job and an art director's job and anyone who's bringing people on to thoroughly analyze what it is that they're looking at, let the candidate know what it is the criteria and the properties that they're looking at for the production, and also to turn over to the candidates access to to the art director or the hiring manager's personal portfolio, so the artists who are candidates can determine and judge whether the person judging them has the expertise to do so. So, trying to just trying to say whether or not these pieces are adequate for an environment vehicle concept artist piece, there would be a couple of things I'd look at if I were the hiring manager. Um, One, this piece, for example, I don't, it has buildings, it has shading, it has properties and pieces, but I don't know what was asked here to arrive at this. It was done for Sin Studio. What was it that the brief asked for in this? So is this an accomplishment in terms of what you're looking to do? Was this an accomplishment for the project? Or was this just a piece that did get put somewhere and you want to have it acknowledged as professional work in your portfolio? I tend to not recommend artists put work in just because it's been somewhere professional. That might be something for a resume, but with a portfolio, there's a couple of things to think of. One, it's yours. So you want to put in exemplary work. As I say, you don't know especially who's going to be seeing it or how they're going to be, what respect they're going to pay, or whether or not they're actually going to be able to even discern what you're doing. So your portfolio is yours. Trying to craft it for an unknown arbiter, an unknown judge, is going to be difficult. And I say that even with the awareness that oftentimes in hiring briefs, they will outline what it is they're looking for. I wouldn't put too much trust that anyone actually knows what that is. I've been in a number of studios and given advice and consultation on how to craft these things, craft the job advertisements, and oftentimes they borrow them from other sources. They use terms that they don't know what they're asking for. So keep in mind your portfolio is yours and you're wanting to show your strengths. So that means you'll have to look at industry standards and figure out where industry standards are weak and where you can strengthen them and put something like that in your portfolio. And even put in how you've gone, hey, I've noticed there's this in the industry and environments are this. I don't think they're using chromatic aberration to its greatest degree. And here's my example. So you want to be able to put in your portfolio what you deem your best work and how you want your work to be presented. I wouldn't go necessarily with, and it is perfectly okay to defy and go against expectations from hiring managers. I've seen that work for people because the work stands out. So move to the next piece. For each of your pieces, if you can make them an exemplar as far as you think it's an exemplar, that's good, not according to a hiring manager. For some of these pieces, like if I were to look at, and I looked at this one a little bit and I saw there was an animation for it as well. A vehicle like this, and there's a couple of different render styles, and that's good. But you do also want to consider what is your particular strength. So there's a lot of discussion about competition out in the various art fields that are out there. There is competition in the sense that if everyone is doing the same thing as everyone else, there's going to be secondary value that's going to get you jobs. Like if you're a friend of somebody, if you have influence somehow in a studio, if you're at the right place, right time. However, there's no competition for your idiosyncratic personal strengths, which I often feel is not something that artists are currently trained in educational venues or even encouraged to do. It's how I've found a good deal of my living is my particular strengths and my particular methods of doing things that other people aren't aware of. I know other artists who do this as well. It's finding not whether you can operate the software like everyone else and build the thing proficiently. What will have you stand out and remove you from the factory line work is the exemplary pieces that are uniquely yours. Um, I don't want to sound rude when I say this, because there may be a number of people who have set their hopes on learning a software proficiently, learning how to do it fast, but learning how to do it the way that everyone else does it, because they've heard that studios, they just hire, they just want a guy who does this and pushes the button and so on and so forth, and you're just a cog in the machine and nothing new has been done. It's not true. That there is a place where people do hire, that falls into studio hiring. A cog in the machine is something that studios use. The higher paid, more satisfying in terms of being able to do your own artwork, contribute your voice, take some control. That involves having to express and demonstrate and show strength in your own idiosyncratic particular skills. So, like, looking at this vehicle, it's proficiently made. There may have been more extravagant ways you could have done it. There are possibly, like, if we look at the edging, maybe there was something with the edging you could have done here, and this looks CG and that, so on. That would be of less interest to me because it's a quickly, easily learned skill, as opposed to, I've seen vehicles like this and I've seen vehicle design like this. Is there something in a vehicle that is unique that would have it stand out, that has some characteristics that are unlike anything I would have expected? Does it have like some animalistic traits or insect traits or something that makes it seem very mechanical, reasonable to use, grounded in the world, but also, whoa, that's kind of a peculiar thing. That actually has menace or intimidation or something in the design itself that can bring that forward. Um, dun, dun, dun. Jayden Draws asked where can we post our port. I use my lips and tongue to speak often. They just aren't working right now. Let me start over. Where can we post our portfolios for future streams if there isn't time? This is all great feedback. Go ahead and post it in the Discord, and I'll go through this one, and then I'll grab it if you want, Jayden Draws. And we'll go from there. And I'll be doing this next week. I'm going to take I think probably the next couple of weeks off. I may be doing some traveling, so I won't be able to do these. But I'll set up a time with the rookies, and we'll figure out a time to. We'll figure out a time to grab these. In the drawing channel in Discord, if you can link to your portfolio or send me a link to the PDF in the Discord channel. Owen, am I at all adding anything helpful to this? And if so, I'm going to jump over to the piece that we talked about for the favorite piece that I wanted to go over with you and look over and give some analysis to. But before I do, is what I'm saying at all helpful or informative? Or would you like me to address another set of problems? Not problems with your work, but problems with portfolios and how to conceive of them. Let's look at another piece. Okay, I want to jump to. I asked Owen what piece might be one that in particular we could look at and go over some ideas for. Owen said it has been helpful It's just some of the advice seems to be counter to what I've asked around. I'm not surprised by that entirely. And there is a thing, I hate to say it, there's no definitive advice to give. Um, if possible, I'll try to give a sense of where I'm coming from with some of this, and where I'm often at opposition to maybe a more popular or more common set of advice. Um, I've actually been in panels and in forums and whatnot with hiring managers from different, very high end, respected studios, and they're nice people and they mean well and they're trying to give the best advice that they can. However, they are speaking from a couple of different points. One, even in some of these discussions, like for example, where they will discuss hiring methods. For example, I was on one, actually a couple of them where this came up, where the discussion of, when your portfolio, only put in what people are asking for and looking for this, that, or the other thing, because we're super busy and, we got things to do and I can't spend all day looking at such and such. Within minutes, the discussion was, well, sometimes we're just too lazy to look at portfolios. Okay, so, and it's true. People are going to be human beings, and the video games, films, VFX studios, any of these places are going to have their own superstitions about things, like their own like in terms of uh, how they believe they act, and then there's an awareness of what actually goes on. Like I've been in studios where people will talk about how busy they are and be in a 2 hour long conversation with each other holding coffee talking about how busy they are, and not notice the dissonance in they're kind of not very busy. Saying you're busy is often a canard. There's also social hierarchies in studios where some people really are going to be super busy and some people aren't going to be super busy and say that they are. Studios have not necessarily common practices. There isn't an industry standard as much as they say there is. There are studios where there are highly skilled veterans, talented, eye on the prize, doing their work very seriously. And there are also studios that are filled with politicians and con men and salesmen who've managed to work their way up to various positions. I've worked in studios where art directors have had no knowledge of art, but they did know the studio head or they were friends with somebody, and their decision making was terrible, and their hiring practices were terrible, and their treatment of the staff was often demeaning. Even though they didn't know art, they would do paint overs of the artist's work that were just disastrous. So even though the panels, for example, or discussion groups where I've been in, where recruiters and HR, hiring managers, VFX supervisors are giving advice, sometimes that advice is mythological. And the real situation is that if you can find a very dedicated, good art director, they're going to have criteria. And even in their art direction practices, that criteria will be informing you as far as possible. They will discuss with you what criteria it is they're looking for in a piece of work. They're going to, like for hiring needs, they're going to say, hey, I looked over your work. I thought your rendering skills are strong, this, that, and the other thing are good. Property by property, here's this. I'm wondering, do you have a piece, or can we get a piece from you that shows this? Because in our project, we're going to be using such and such a need. We didn't see too many examples of it here, and we want to confirm that is something you're comfortable with doing. or if you need training, we can discuss and negotiate from there. That can happen as well, but it's much more rare. More often, you have hiring managers looking at your work in a cursory way. They can be in a bad mood that day. Strangely, I've heard that's a thing. Well, sometimes somebody's in a bad mood, they look at your work and they throw it away. Sometimes they might be in a bad mood, but that's not an excuse. You don't get to use a bad mood to throw away a decent candidate. Um, if being aware you're in a bad mood is also the job of an art director, to be able to modulate and still stick to criteria. Um, Being that so few of these jobs and even the testing methods, like if you have to take an art test, very rarely will it have the good structure and parallel type of development that the studio itself is doing. Oftentimes they will turn over art tests, unpaid art tests, ask the artists to perform tasks that they don't perform in the studio, basically isolating the artist, and then make judgments on that. Whereas most of the people in the studio couldn't do those tests in the timeline required. So I look at these things in terms not of what are the realistic common practices that are likely or probable. I look at this in terms of one, what's been invented for how people get hired is not a set of rules yet. More often than not, flipping the script and showing something extraordinary can and will get you attention and work. That the past common bad practices may still exist. They don't come to good outcomes. So, with portfolios going forward tomorrow and the next day and so on, I do recommend that artists start taking control, be a little more forceful to the hiring groups with them, insist on verifications that their work is being reviewed under criteria and so on. With that in mind, though, I do believe that the artists themselves need to up the standards, need to start enforcing and leading the witness of the hiring managers so they know and understand what they're looking at, to make it much easier for them to have respected expertise and force as they do enter the hiring negotiations and the hiring processes. So I have a bit of a different stance than you might hear on, well, this is how you get hired in the industry and this is the same old way. I'm sure there is same old way, and I'm sure you can get jobs in the same old way and they will be not good. More and more, the same old jobs and same old way are decaying and falling apart. Even practices and pipelines, studio practices because of COVID, have changed things, have changed the way we have to work and our attitudes toward work, what we're willing to do, and has started to reset some of the value of what an artist does. In other words, the financial value, not to mention the prestigious value. So I often will give advice that sounds different than what you'll hear hiring managers say, but I'm not sure hiring managers are always speaking authentically. I don't think they're necessarily lying, but I think they are telling the story they'd like to hear and they'd like to think of themselves. And I think they're also talking about a past model where basically the candidates are bowing their heads and being unnecessarily submissive. You do have to keep in mind that when you're being hired in a studio, and this is often put forward, well, you're just the low guy on the rung. Art doesn't have low guys on the rung. Art has artists. Artists are experts, idiosyncratic, particular, and strong in their own unique way that interacts with a collaborative team. Good studios and good art directors note that. They try to extract as much value from that. They try to keep and cherish it. More reckless studios will pick up this industrial kind of harvesting hiring method. So part of what I give over is maybe a little bit of an alternative view on how to get the job that will more enhance your ability to grow and be an artist and take control of the industry you're part of, as far as you're able and willing. Did that that was really long. I apologize, but I hope that was a fairly clear description of the difference in my suggestions for portfolios and what you may hear pretty commonly around. For I want to get to this piece also, and I do want to get to Jayden's the portfolio as well, and give a quick overview there. For this piece, again, so I'll read briefly. Emperor Arrival to a Dark and Gritty City in the Future. This is an assignment I did at CDA in Nick Shoemaker's Blender course. I took a lot of inspiration from Sid Mead and, sorry, let me jump over here, and Blade Runner. Okay, so a couple of questions I'd like to ask with this. I'm not necessarily going to analyze it. What do you think are the strongest parts of this image? As far as focus goes and attention, there can be properties taken from other artists or quoted basically from other artists or points of inspiration. But in terms of a concept, so when you think of concepts of any sort, whether it's an individual item like a piece of gear or a vehicle. In this case, it's a scene. There's stories with it. So if you think of a vehicle and you think of its shaping and form as one type of story or one bundle of information, its texture is a 2D version of another type of narrative and story and information. So if you have a tank or let's say even this vehicle, the shaping of the vehicle, and I tend not to mention shape language because I think there's an alternative set of ideas that are a bit more complicated, but give a bit more power and control. But the shape and the affinities that this vehicle brings, for example, with the texture on top of it, the scraping of the texture, the shine, the little idiosyncratic pieces of the texture tell a different story than the three-dimensional form of the vehicle itself. So in any type of concept, you're still giving over types of storytelling or stories and histories about properties or attributes. So for this story, there are pieces, there are parts. What is the story and what do you think are the strongest parts that you'd like to bring out and describe to somebody using a concept? And I know that was a lot to ask you to type over. While you are, if you are going to type that out, an answer to that, let me go over real quick and grab Jayden's portfolio. There we go. Sorry about the pause here. I'm just organizing a couple of the screens so I can see if there's any other questions or thoughts. All right, so there's an image that I will grab real quick also for this. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. It's Jad. Is that right? Jad Whalen is the artist we'll be looking at next. Okay. I'm not seeing a reply from Owen on this one, so I'll just wrap up a couple of my thoughts on this piece. Being that this is a story piece, a scene, as opposed to an object, um, one of the things I would do is there's focus, and there's, in other words, we have a point that we're looking at um, in particular. For this piece, if I were to draw it, and again, uh, it's oh wait, Owen's answered. I thought about like a parade or celebration when I was making it, but I took a different direction and made it a cinematic frame, which might be part of a larger story. The Emperor arriving to the mansion and cut to the next frame. Um, hmm. A couple of thoughts on this is with each of these pieces, and for a narrative frame, even in concept. And oftentimes concept is seen as kind of rough and whatnot, but I don't usually think of it as that. I think of it using a precise set of tools that give over the most impact the fastest way possible. Sometimes the fastest way possible is pretty complex. Um, with this, I'd want to give over, like, if this is an emperor, a bit more of a sense of pomp, guards, extravagance. If they're what type of emperor are they? Like a military strongman? Are they a who is this? What is their history that at a snap I could look at and go, oh, this guy's he's a military dictator. Their vehicle, what is it about the vehicle that would make this an emperor's vehicle? Its sleekness, its smoothness, or would an emperor's vehicle need more protection, more ostentation, things along those lines? And these aren't ideas to criticize. These are just, if I were to say something that might help to a next stage with this image is, if you were even just to take quick notes and write a quick story about each piece, about who and why and where. Why are we, for example, as the audience, this particular camera angle? Why are we looking at this arrival like this? Are we looking at it? Is it a product placement to feature the vehicle? And if so, do we want the vehicle lit in such a way that it is the hero object? It's glamorized in its glint. Its materials are especially awesome, things along those lines. How does it counterpoint against a background? So if it is a gritty background, is it a dirty, horrible background? Like, are the buildings themselves, do they have graffiti? Are they falling apart? Are there signs of not just diminished color and value, or not diminished value, but constrained value, looking like there's a bit of smogginess, but are the buildings themselves actually falling apart, covered with grit? Is there a counterpoint between the opulence of the emperor and the dilapidation of the city behind him, for example? So there would be I would look at this in terms of needing more story. It shows that there are pieces and you can put people in a place and a vehicle in a place and so on. But the story and the components of each piece in relationship to each other. That would be a thing that, to put this in a portfolio piece, it shows there's modeling and it shows there's featuring and so on and so forth. What can enhance those is, how are they contributing to a story? That will up your detail. It will enhance your lighting. It will change and angle your cameras differently. so that they have to match the story and match the viewer's position looking at this piece. Um, Oftentimes you'll hear in critiques people saying, well, like, this could have more detail and that could have more detail. I try not to mention things like where I think you should have more detail. Instead, I would mention detail as a tool. In this case, I would say that let the story drive places to enhance your detail, lighting, camera angles, and how these things compare to one another. You don't necessarily want the back buildings to be as high detail and conflict with the attention given to the emperor and the vehicle in the center there. Um, on the whole, is the portfolio professional and ready to go? It I don't have sufficient information to answer because there's a range of studios, and part of it depends on what is your objective. So if you wanted to go to a junior studio, they may be looking for these skills, and this might be sufficient. If you were looking to go to ILM, DNEG, um, any of the giant houses, um, there are a number of pieces that I think you'll need to work on. One is the drivers of detail. The other is trying to get across what properties you're looking to give over to your work. So, for example, with the vehicle, um, with this vehicle, are you trying to say that you want to be on the 3D uh, hard surface modeling teams and whatnot? If so, I would grab the portfolio of somebody already on one of the staff and I would do a one-to-one comparison with them. Me offering over what I would think would be like, well, your texturing may need some work and some of the modeling might need some work and so on, won't mean as much as you looking and doing a one-to-one comparison test against somebody who's already high-end in the industry. Um, Looking at it and going, okay, well, what are they doing? How long did it take them to do it, if you can find that information, because you do have to work under timelines with some of these things. Um, at the same time, it does seem to be different than the stated interest in being a concept artist, because this is a modeling thing. It's good to know modeling. It's good to be able to use modeling in 3D as well as 2D in environments to do concepts to get you where you need to go. But showing them so that they're a little out of context there might confuse. Like if you took this, did a paint over that enhanced some of the details and did some things that 3D can't do to indicate that you're working on a vehicle and you're sending it off in some direction that breaks angles but still gives impact, that might be a thing. But as I say, this might not bar you from being hired on junior studios, startup studios, and so on, where you could also enhance your skills, work with, mentor with, and so on, and art director or a lead artist or so on who could take you on. I would say that send out the work without being afraid. Do so not shyly, um, but also buttress yourself and be prepared to be rejected, and keep, if they offer anything with the rejection, like any advice or anything, read it, possibly take it with a grain of salt. If it really sounds good and reasonable, and maybe look at some training in some various areas. Um, but at the same time, know that it is a bit of a process to get hired, and there is a learning curve to understand where you want to communicate, how you want to communicate, and where you want to aim yourself. It isn't just a question of how do I get hired. You probably want to find the studio that you think does the best work, make sure your work and your standards, and you have to look at these honestly, your work and your standards meet the criteria that they've already set. So the properties, like, is your attention to detail, attention to modeling, efficiency in modeling, knowledge of atmospherics and environment, atmospherics in terms of storytelling, so on and so forth. Are these things comparable to what they're looking for? And in some cases, can you say, I think I can beat what you've got. You may be the top, but I think I got a couple of things that might surprise you. So go out and fail on purpose if you need to, succeed where you can, and inch by inch, understand it's not going to be a thing where saying, yeah, your portfolio looks professional, go for it. There's going to be a bit of an evolution you're going to need to go through to one, discover where you need to put work in and insist, and two, where you'll be listening to the good advice and reasonable standards that companies might be looking for. Did that answer the question okay? I hope that didn't sound like equivocating. In summary, what I'd say is that I've seen work of your caliber, and I've seen artists get hired with it. I would say you are going to need to aim yourself at a couple of skills and properties to approach any of the larger studios. They will be at times, as I've mentioned, possibly unnecessarily harsh, but sometimes, as I say, if you run into a really good art director, they're going to see right away all the pieces they're going to need for their projects. And if it doesn't hit, it isn't reasonable to expect them to hire you and give a chance. So I would give it a try. Brace for both successes and failures, maybe not successes at peaks, but little successes that you can learn from, but also be prepared for, and don't be stressed out by possible rejections. I hope that was helpful. I'm going to go over to Jad's work. Owen mentioned real quick, it does answer the question. Thank you, Paul. It's just a bit nerve-wracking to submit it. You know what? Just on a piece on that, casually submitting, it's going to take time. The problem is that, and I've run into this and met artists where this is the case, people need to work to live. And they need jobs. It takes time and effort to craft your skills as an artist. Working other jobs to support that can be exhausting. It's a difficult setup. I don't know a solution for it. And it can be very nerve-wracking, and there's a lot on the line as you go. When I was coming up through stuff, I waited tables, I managed a bookstore, I did all these things. I also largely didn't interact with the art world because I found it annoying. It changed a bit when I finally did break in. One of the things that allowed me to break in was some of the changes in the art world. And by being idiosyncratic, like I was hired on my first game and film things because my work was a little weird in comparison to what studios and places were getting from art schools, artists coming out of art schools. I had a different take and different approach. So I was able to fill in some gaps and bridge some areas that I didn't know were gaps and needed bridges. Don't be shy to submit these things, and brace yourself for a long haul. It does take a bit of time, maybe not as long as it seems, especially if you focus on not necessarily a discipline or pleasing somebody, but making sure that you're examining things, and every work you do, you're upping your standards. Um, that would be my advice on it. That I don't know a remedy for the struggle part, but um, if you keep your head down and focus, it can, one, distract from the stresses of the struggle, but also know that every piece you work on is a step forward. It's there, you have thousands of steps in your life. You're never going to end up being the artist you want to be, but in the end, keep trying and you will achieve the ends you want to achieve. Um, okay. Turning over to, and thanks, Owen. Thanks for letting me look over your work and comment on it. Turning over to Jad. Jad said, I'd like to work at Frontier in the UK on Elite Dangerous or for GadgetBot on Call of Duty, something in that kind of wheelhouse. I'm currently in my third year at CDW, doing one more year of honors. Then I'll be eligible for visas overseas to gain work. I'll be looking globally. Okay. Let's take a look here. Okay. Jed, I have a quick question, and we'll wrap up in about 15-20 minutes. Was there a piece in particular that you were struggling with, or did you want an overview of your general portfolio as a whole? Okay, so let's look at one that was submitted and isn't on the ArtStation. Let me jump over real quick. All right. Okay. Sorry, let me reorganize and find where I am again. Okay. All right. So, with a number of the pieces actually that I saw on the ArtStation pieces, there, what would you say is your strength and your area of interest? What is it you like to do most? And what areas would you say are the areas where you have the sense you'd like to strengthen and buttress? Looking through these pieces, there is a wide range of different techniques and tactics. Was there one in particular that and we'll go over the piece that I have showing here. But is there a piece or a set of tactics that you in particular feel are a good direction you want to go, your signature, are kind of how you want to aim yourself? Okay. Jed writes, this is the first image of 4 potential paintings for a story I'm working on for the rookies next year. I'll be submitting probably 3 of 4 projects for the rookies. Jed wants to do science fiction, environment design, world building, and narrative storytelling. Sketch to 3D to paint over. This is how I've been doing all my pieces the last few years. Okay. Looking at this and a couple of thoughts on some things for environments. There's a few different ways that you can adapt storytelling in environment, and some of them have to do with the cognitive ways our vision breaks down importance. So, if you think of a tiger far away from you as opposed to a tiger close up, its importance changes and transitions. Um, this is a principle called depth change equals importance or interest change. Okay, so when we're working on any type of piece, we want to indicate depths and how things interact with each other. In motion, we can use parallax to help indicate this. One of the things that often helps is position of the viewer. So if you think about like if the viewer were shorter and we were looking at this aisleway from a more immediate view, put these here. Let's say these are these little orbs here. We'll set it right there. Okay. Okay, so that we're a person about head high here looking at the scene. So things from this point can look much deeper, almost like a comic book perspective using focal length of the camera, like an 18 millimeter, and distorting how grand giant pieces are in relation to ourselves, how magnificent a thing can be. Okay. This is the establishing shot. Okay, even in establishing shots, we can establish the grandeur of pieces. We can establish, like for example, and this is I'm going to be altering the shapes of the landscape just a little bit. We can add postural pieces to landscapes. Postural pieces to landscapes that are like a person. We do tend to read landscapes and pay attention to things as if they do have human style anatomy somehow bunched up in areas. We'll bend things to look like that. A lot of times in place or in settings, we'll get an ominous feel about places because we've started to project agency into the landscape itself. And that has to do with things like looming and hovering, things that seem to bend or menace and take on possible sharp edges and hunching, for example. Okay. So a couple of the things with this, we like if I were grabbing this and working on this, one of the things I'd want to use and manipulate fairly frequently would be atmospheric perspective, ground up setting distances, dropped chroma for the background. But sometimes also, even though things tend to get blurrier as they go into the distance, I sometimes break that rule because one of the things we do when we're looking around at anything, points of interest, our eyes will scan them longer, and we will start to pick out delineations. They still aren't super clear if we were to take it and compare it to a photograph, but it's perceptually more clear. We start to pick out delineations. And faking a delineation, adding the hyperreal to an environment, is also something we can do. It's hyperreal in the sense if you take a photograph of it, it isn't going to show up in a photograph. But the way our perceptions work is we'll still read them. The systems of our perceptions are coordinating and compositing different types of information that a photograph doesn't. So, how we build the experience of vision, um, oftentimes line and delineation, showing boundaries or indicating where there are boundaries, becomes a very important thing that even though if we took a photograph we couldn't see it, we would be able to perceive it, and it's something we can add and fake in different environments to give over impact and focus. um, sorry, got off track there a little bit. So a couple of things would be to add atmospheric perspective, even if it is not especially physically accurate, to still give over stepped regions and give over uh, the sense of distancing. So even here, as we're heading into the background there, drop out some of the strong chroma and add some atmospheric perspective. By the same token, the things up close I would amplify in chroma. In Photoshop, I would grab a vibrancy and saturation layer and do a quick pass here in the foreground on the elaborate floor. I would also take and into the foreground, take some of the more vibrant and brilliant colors and make sure they were unrealistically, but points of focus visible as recurring patterns to be points of interest. So taking the extraordinary things and counterpointing them against what might be, just to use the general idea, what turns into just an ignored environment, taking extraordinary parts and pulling them out of that range. Is all of this sounding fairly helpful or reasonable, or do you think I'm off on a couple of things in terms of where you were looking to go with some of this information, some of this visual information, that is? Did I add that stick man? Of course, down at the base. There are a couple of parts that I would also, as a framing tactic, these large pieces, since we're opening out at a vista, I would actually have them dulled and fall back a little bit. There might be a couple of spots on the metallic grating of the windows that could be used for adding some glint, which is a very good, quick, eye-catching accent. But I think one of the things that would want to be done for even an establishing shot is the hierarchy of attention and interest. Like, what do we want to see in an establishing shot? First, second, third, fourth, fifth. What do we want to not be aware we saw, but have taken in and noticed? Jad mentions, sounds good. It's good feedback. I was going for a painterly concept finish, looking at old masters. Okay. Let me think on that just a second. Sometimes I'm not sure I understand what's meant by painterly, and I don't mean that to sound insulting or critical or anything. I've run into when I think of painters, I think of everything from super refined um, to kind of mushy, sketchy brush strokes. Um, of these things is that when it's painterly, is the idea to have visible high saturation strokes like a type of Monet piece, like a an impressionist type thing, or a one of the like academic landscape painters, or something along those lines. So with this, there might also be an opportunity to damp down some of the whites in the background. Um, and up not the contrast, but the delineation between the two, or the area between the two. Jad has a quick image. I'll click the link there. You know what? I'm not even smart enough to know how to click the link on that chat box there. I'm so sorry. I'll make sure it's visible here for anyone who wants to see it. And yeah, well, we've gone about an hour and a half so far, and uh, Jad, I hope I've answered questions adequately there. And if not, feel free to hit me up and send any questions you may have, or ideas, or commentary at paul@paulmellender.com, or here on the Discord on the rookies. I hope that was helpful, and thanks a lot, everybody. I'll talk with Owen and Andrew and figure out time for a next group. As I say, I'll probably be traveling and a bit occupied over the next couple of weeks, but I'll be coming back, and we can do more of these if that's helpful. All right, thank you, and see you next time. And thanks again to Jad and Owen for letting me go over their work.